My name is Emily Carter, and when I landed my big promotion at Thompson Enterprises, I thought my husband's family would finally see me as more than just the temporary girlfriend who got lucky. I'd worked tirelessly for years, clawing my way up from answering phones to regional manager. But at the celebration dinner, my husband's Aunt Margaret didn't even let me sit down before she sneered. "Well, they must have really lowered the bar to pick you." The words hit like a punch. My mother-in-law, Patricia, chimed in with a smirk. Or maybe they just needed to fill some quota. The table, James's cousins, uncles, and their high society friends, erupted in laughter, their chuckles echoing off the crystal chandeliers of La Dolce Vita, the kind of restaurant where every fork placement screamed wealth. I felt my face burn, my carefully chosen navy dress suddenly feeling like a cheap costume. But then Claire Thompson, the CEO's wife, stood up, her voice sharp and cold as steel. "That's an interesting take, Margaret. Especially since a very revealing file about your nephew, Ethan, just landed on my desk. Shall we discuss it now, in front of everyone?" The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. My heart pounded. This was the beginning of a story that would unravel secrets, shatter relationships, and change my life forever. La Dolce Vita was the kind of place where the napkins were folded into swans, and the wine cost more than my monthly rent. I'd spent days picking out my outfit, hoping my navy blazer and silk blouse would scream regional manager instead of outsider. James, my husband of 3 years, pulled out my chair and whispered, "Ignore Margaret. She's just being herself." But ignoring Margaret was like ignoring a wasp in your hair. I sat down, smoothing my dress, and tried to hold my head high. The white tablecloths glowed under the soft lighting, and the crystal glasses caught every flicker of the chandeliers. "Regional manager," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's a big deal. I'll be overseeing all our West Coast offices, managing teams, and driving growth." I looked around, hoping for a smile, a nod, anything. Instead, Patricia tilted her head, her pearl earrings glinting. "How sweet. What happened to the person who had that job before? Did they retire? Or get reassigned?" Her tone dripped with implication, as if I'd only gotten the job because someone else had been pushed out to make room for me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. The position was created because our company grew by 30% in just 18 months. They needed someone to handle the new workload. That 30% was my badge of honor. Proof of the late nights I'd spent poring over spreadsheets, the weekends I'd sacrificed for client calls, the years I'd juggled a full-time job and an MBA. But Margaret just sipped her wine, her lips curling. 30%? That's cute. It's easy to grow when you start from nothing, isn't it? The table laughed again, and I felt James's hand brush mine under the table, a weak attempt at comfort. But his silence screamed louder than his touch. 3 years of family dinners, 3 years of their snide comments, and he'd never once told them to stop. The waiter appeared, and Margaret ordered a bottle of Chateau Lafite with a perfect French accent, reminding everyone she'd studied in Paris. I stared at my plate, the weight of their judgment heavier than the crystal glass in my hand. Let me pause here to speak directly to you, my reader. This story is about fighting for what you've earned, standing up to those who try to tear you down, and finding the courage to claim your place. If you believe hard work should matter more than who you know, stick with me. This tale of justice is just beginning, and it's going to get intense. Let's dive back in. Patricia set down her menu, her smile as sharp as a knife. "So, Emily, what does a regional manager even do? Sounds like a lot of meetings and paperwork." Her words were sweet, but they were meant to cut, to make my job sound small and unimportant. I forced a smile. "It's about leading teams, growing our business, keeping clients happy, and making tough decisions. It's a lot of responsibility, but I'm ready for it." Margaret leaned forward, her diamond earrings sparkling like tiny daggers. "Responsibility? Oh honey, that's adorable. Companies these days are so progressive, aren't they? Always looking to check certain boxes." She didn't say it outright, but the implication was clear. She thought I'd only gotten the job because of some diversity initiative, not because I'd earned it. My chest tightened, but I refused to let her win. "My company values hard work," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "They don't hand out jobs like this for nothing. I earned this through years of effort." Margaret's eyebrows flicked up, the only sign she'd heard me. Instead of responding, she pivoted. Speaking of real talent, have you heard about Ethan's promotion? She said, her voice swelling with pride. Ethan was her nephew, the family's golden boy, the one they never stopped praising. Youngest senior analyst at Thomson Enterprises, she boasted. Straight out of grad school and already making waves. Some people are just born to lead, you know? Patricia nodded eagerly. Ethan's brilliant. Top of his class, internships at Fortune 500 companies, glowing recommendation letters from professors who begged him to join their research projects. It's so refreshing to see someone who truly deserves their success. The words sliced through me. They were saying Ethan earned his position, while I'd been given mine. James shifted in his seat, his eyes glued to his bread plate, as if it held the answers to life's great mysteries. I needed him to say something, to tell them about the nights I'd stayed up until dawn studying the client deals I'd closed that brought in millions. But he stayed silent, and the silence felt like betrayal. Patricia wasn't done. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. You know, Emily, some women find their true success at home, supporting their husbands, creating a warm, balanced life. That's what really matters. Her words hit like a sledgehammer. Every late night I'd spent working, every weekend I'd missed James's golf tournaments, every sacrifice I'd made for my career. They were calling it selfish, like I'd failed as a wife by chasing my dreams. Margaret raised her wine glass in a mock toast. To priorities, she said, her eyes locked on mine. A woman's real success is how happy her husband looks. I glanced at James, searching for any sign he disagreed. His jaw was tight, but he said nothing. 3 years of marriage, and he was still more afraid of upsetting his family than standing up for me. The restaurant felt suffocating, the warm lighting too harsh, the chatter from other tables too loud. I excused myself to the bathroom, my hands trembling as I splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror I saw a stranger, someone who'd let these people make her doubt her own worth. I'd fought so hard for this promotion, but their words were louder than my pride. I took a deep breath, straightened my blazer, and went back to the table, determined not to let them break me. When I returned, the conversation had shifted to Ethan's latest genius project. Margaret was gushing about how he'd wowed a major client with his innovative ideas, while Patricia nodded like he was the second coming of Einstein. I sat down, feeling like an outsider at my own celebration. That's when Claire Thompson stood up. She'd been quiet all night, sitting at the end of the table in an elegant black dress, her presence understated but powerful. As the CEO's wife, she didn't need to shout to command attention. But when she spoke, the room froze. "This is an interesting conversation," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "Especially since I just received a file about your nephew, Ethan. It's very illuminating. Should we discuss it now? Or would you prefer a private setting?" Margaret's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Patricia's confident smile flickered like a dying candle. Claire's eyes met mine for a moment, and I saw something in them. Not pity but recognition, like she'd been watching this whole charade and had finally had enough. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. What about Ethan?" Claire's smile was sharp as glass. "Oh, I think that's a conversation for another time. Don't you agree?" The power at the table shifted in an instant. Margaret and Patricia, in their designer dresses and perfect makeup, suddenly looked small, their confidence crumbling under Claire's gaze. I felt a spark of hope, a feeling I hadn't had all night. Something big was coming, and I was ready to see it unfold. The next Monday, I walked into Thomson Enterprises with a new fire in my chest. Claire's cryptic comment about Ethan echoed in my mind as I settled into my cubicle, the familiar hum of keyboards and coffee machines around me. Ethan's workspace was in a prime spot, not quite a corner office but close enough to make you jealous. Glass walls, a sleek standing desk, and a view of the city skyline that I dreamed of during my first 5 years at the company. For a 24-year-old barely a year into the job, it was too good to be true. And I was starting to suspect it was. My computer pinged with a reminder. Quarterly compliance review. I'd volunteered for it months ago, partly because I loved the order of numbers and partly because it gave me access to parts of the company I'd never seen before. The compliance office was a sterile, quiet place, all spreadsheets and fluorescent lights. "Ready for the fun stuff?" my coworker Lisa teased, handing me a stack of files. I laughed, but my mind was already racing. Numbers don't lie, not like people do. I started with routine expense reports, hotel bills, client lunches, travel receipts. Everything looked normal until I opened Ethan's file. The first red flag was a $400 dinner receipt from a fancy restaurant in Miami. Nothing too strange except Ethan's calendar said he was in Seattle that week. I checked his travel records. No flights to Miami, no client meetings scheduled. Then I found another receipt, this one from Boston, for a hotel stay when Ethan was supposedly working in our San Francisco office. My heart started pounding. These weren't mistakes. Someone was giving Ethan fake receipts, and he was claiming them as business expenses. Find anything juicy? Lisa asked, glancing over my shoulder. Just some mixed-up travel dates, I said, keeping my voice casual. But inside I was buzzing. This was bigger than a few wrong receipts. Ethan was stealing from the company, and I was going to prove it. That night I spread the evidence across my kitchen table. Screenshots of receipts, copies of Ethan's calendar, notes on the discrepancies. James came home late, his tie loosened and a faint smell of beer on his breath. "Still working?" he asked, eyeing the papers. "Just catching up," I said, tucking the files away. He didn't press, but I could feel his gaze lingering, like he sensed I was digging into something dangerous. I didn't tell him what I'd found. Not yet. I needed more proof and I needed to be sure. Over the next week I kept digging. Ethan's vendor payments were another bombshell. He'd approved thousands of dollars to companies with names like Coastal Insights and Bay Area Strategies, businesses that didn't exist. Their addresses were just P.O. boxes, and their invoices were vague with typos and identical formats. One company, Pacific Growth Solutions, was registered to Ethan's personal email. My hands shook as I saved the evidence to a private folder on my cloud drive. Ethan wasn't just faking expenses, he was creating fake companies to pay himself. It was fraud, plain and simple. Then Ethan caught me off guard. He stopped by my desk one morning, coffee in hand, his smile as slick as ever. "Heard you're killing it as regional manager," he said, but his tone was mocking. Pretty impressive for someone who started answering phones. The jab hurt, but I kept my face neutral. "Thanks," I said. "Just doing my job." Speaking of, I had a question about this receipt from Miami. I held up the paper, watching his reaction. For a split second, his smile faltered, his eyes darting to the receipt and back to my face. "Oh, that? Just a client dinner. Must have mixed up the dates." He laughed, but his hands were shaking. "I'll fix it," he said, walking away too quickly. I knew he was lying and he knew I knew. That evening I found something even worse. Ethan had sent me a report for a client project, full of charts and fancy analysis. But when I checked the file's metadata, it listed the author as Sarah Johnson, a former employee who'd left 2 years ago. The report was 3 years old, just rebranded with Ethan's name. He wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing other people's work and passing it off as his own. I sat back, stunned. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. This was about every time Margaret and Patricia had made me feel like I didn't belong. Every time they praised Ethan's natural talent, while dismissing my hard work. I saved every piece of evidence, but I didn't report it yet. I wanted to be sure, and I wanted the timing to be perfect. 2 weeks later, my world turned upside down again. James started acting strange, distant, jumpy, like he was hiding something. One night, while he was in the shower, I checked our shared computer. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed answers. In the printer history, I found 3 files printed late at night. Reference letter 1 PDF, reference letter top PDF, and recommendation of this PDF. My stomach dropped. I opened the first one. It was a glowing reference letter for Ethan, praising his skills during an internship at a company called Horizon Consulting. But Horizon Consulting didn't exist. It was one of Ethan's fake companies. The second letter was from a retired executive, someone who hadn't worked in years. The third was from a woman named Laura Bennett, a former colleague of James's. But Laura had been living in London for the past 4 years. She couldn't have worked with Ethan. I felt sick. James hadn't just known about Ethan's lies, he'd helped create them. He'd forged these letters, using his own contacts to lie for his cousin. I printed the letters, saved them to my cloud drive, and cleared the computer's history. Then I emailed Laura Bennett, asking if she'd written a reference for Ethan. Her reply came fast. She hadn't written a letter in years and had never met Ethan. That was it, the final piece. James wasn't just complicit. He was the architect of Ethan's fraud. I didn't confront James. Instead, I created a new email account and sent everything to Claire Thompson. The fake receipts, the shell company records, the stolen report, the forged letters. I sent it from a coffee shop across town, using their Wi-Fi to cover my tracks. Then I deleted the account and waited. 3 days later, an invitation arrived for Thompson Enterprises' annual gala, where I'd be honored as a new regional manager. James tossed it on the counter like it was junk mail. "These things are just for show," he muttered. "Bunch of suits pretending they care about your work." His words stung, but I didn't argue. "It matters to me," I said. "I want you to come." He sighed. "Fine, but I'm not wearing a tux." The gala was at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a glittering sea of chandeliers and velvet drapes. I wore my navy dress, the one Margaret had mocked years ago, and felt like it was armor. Margaret and Patricia were there, sipping cocktails and whispering about other guests' outfits. "Look at you, Miss Regional Manager," Patricia said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Such a big title for such a little job." I smiled and thanked her, refusing to let her ruin my night. Ethan's chair was empty, and I wondered if my email had already done its work. The evening dragged on with speeches and clinking glasses, but the mood shifted when Claire Thompson stood up. She wasn't on the program, but the room went quiet as she approached the microphone. "Tonight we celebrate hard work and integrity," she said, her voice steady. "But we've recently uncovered something troubling. Fake credentials, stolen work, and fraud within our company." Margaret's glass clinked loudly as she set it down. Patricia's face went white. Claire held up a folder. "Forged letters, fake expenses, and plagiarized reports. The person responsible has been suspended, and we're investigating everyone involved." She looked straight at our table, and I felt James's hand grip mine, not in support but in panic. After the gala, James confronted me in the parking lot. "You did this, didn't you?" he hissed, his face pale under the streetlights. I looked at him, his eyes wild with fear. "I just made sure the truth came out," I said. "You made your choice, James. I made mine." We drove home in silence, but for the first time, I felt powerful, like I'd finally taken control of my own story. The next Monday, Ethan's desk was empty. His badge didn't work, his computer was off, and his fancy coffee mug sat alone on his desk. The office buzzed with whispers. "They boxed up his files at dawn," my coworker Mark told me. "This is big." My phone rang, James sounding panicked. "They suspended Ethan. Margaret's freaking out. She thinks someone's out to get him." I stayed calm. Maybe they found something real. He went quiet, then whispered, "I just helped with some formatting. That's all." I hung up, my hand steady. He was lying, and we both knew it. Later that day, Claire called me to the executive conference room. She had the forged letters on the table. "These trace back to your home IP address," she said, watching me closely. "James is involved, isn't he?" I nodded, keeping my face blank. "Thank you for the tip," she said. "You protected this company's integrity." She told me James had been asked to resign from his job, and I felt a mix of relief and sadness. He'd made his choices, and now he'd face the consequences. Margaret called me that afternoon, screaming, "You ruined Ethan's life. You're just jealous of his talent." I let her rant, then said, "I didn't ruin anything. I just let the truth speak for itself." She hung up, and I felt lighter than I had in years. That night, James left a note on the kitchen counter with his house key. "I can't stay here after what you did. I'm moving out. I hope you're happy." I wasn't happy, but I was free. 3 years passed, and my life transformed in ways I never could have imagined. I moved out of James's suburban house, a cold beige colonial that always felt like his, not ours, and into a downtown loft with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows. The morning light poured in, filling the space with warmth and possibility. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. Watercolor landscapes at first, then bold abstracts that felt like they were pouring straight from my soul. Every brushstroke was a reclaiming of the parts of myself I'd lost in my marriage. At Thompson Enterprises, I was promoted to Senior Strategic Director, a role where I shaped the company's future instead of just following orders. My team's work boosted efficiency by 15% and client satisfaction by 20%. At the annual board meeting, Claire praised my leadership, saying, "This is what happens when we reward talent and integrity." Ethan's fraud case ended with a plea deal, restitution and community service, no jail time. James struggled, bouncing between low-paying jobs after his corporate career collapsed. Margaret sent me one last letter, begging me to drop the charges against Ethan. I tossed it in the trash without a second thought. But the story didn't end there. One day, as I was preparing for a major client presentation, I got an email from an unknown address. The subject line read, "You don't know the half of it." My heart skipped a beat. The email contained a single attachment, a scanned document from a company called Horizon Ventures, one of Ethan's fake businesses. It was a contract, signed by James, authorizing payments to a bank account I didn't recognize. The email's message was brief. "Check the account number. You'll find the real mastermind." I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I thought this was over, but now it felt like the story was far from finished. I traced the account number to an offshore bank, registered to a name I didn't expect. Patricia, my mother-in-law. My mind reeled. Patricia, who'd always played the role of the doting, judgmental matriarch, was the one funneling money through Ethan's shell companies. She'd been the puppet master, using Ethan as a front while James provided the paperwork. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. My entire marriage had been a lie, tangled in a web of family deceit that went deeper than I'd ever imagined. I didn't act right away. Instead, I spent weeks gathering more evidence, working late nights with Lisa, who'd become my closest ally at work. We found bank records, email threads, and even a hidden ledger Patricia kept, detailing every transaction. It was a full-blown conspiracy, and Patricia had been skimming profits from Thompson Enterprises for years, using Ethan's fake companies as a cover. The scale of it was staggering. Nearly $200,000 in fraudulent payments over 5 years. This time I didn't go to Claire. I went straight to the board, presenting my findings in a closed-door meeting. The room was silent as I laid out the evidence, my voice steady despite the weight of what I was doing. "This isn't just about Ethan," I said. "It's about protecting the company from a systemic betrayal." The board acted swiftly. Patricia was banned from all company events, and legal action was initiated against her. The news hit the family like a bomb. Margaret stopped speaking to me entirely, and James sent a single text, "You've destroyed us." I didn't respond. He destroyed himself long ago. 5 years after that fateful dinner, I stood in my loft, now filled with my paintings, each one a testament to the woman I'd become. I was no longer the Emily who apologized for her success, who shrank under Margaret's sneers or James's silence. I was vice president of strategy at Thompson Enterprises, a role I'd earned through relentless work and unyielding integrity. My team's innovations had driven a 25% increase in company revenue, and I was invited to speak at industry conferences, sharing stages with CEOs and thought leaders. One evening, as I sipped wine and watched the sunset through my loft's windows, my sister Lauren visited. "This place is you," she said, running her hand along the brick wall. "No pretense, just light and truth." I told her about the new promotion, the divorce, the paintings. She hugged me and said, "You didn't just win, Emily. You became unstoppable." She was right. The real victory wasn't exposing Ethan or Patricia or leaving James. It was learning to value myself, to stand up for what's right, and to live a life that was authentically mine. But there was one final twist. At a company retreat, Claire pulled me aside and handed me a small, sealed envelope. "This came for you," she said, her eyes curious. Inside was a handwritten note from Patricia, the first contact in years. "You think you've won, but you'll never be one of us. Enjoy your little victory, but watch your back." The threat sent a chill down my spine, but I didn't flinch. I handed the note to Claire, who promised to pass it to the legal team. "You're not alone in this," she said, her voice warm. "You've earned your place here, and we've got your back." That night I painted a new piece, a vibrant, swirling canvas of reds and golds, a celebration of resilience. Patricia's threat was just noise, a desperate cry from a woman who'd lost everything. I'd built a life I loved, surrounded by people who valued me for my work, not my connections. Justice wasn't about punishment. It was about letting the truth shine and standing tall in its light. And for the first time, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. If Emily's journey of courage and truth had you cheering, let me know your favorite moment. Mine was when Claire dropped that bombshell at the gala, turning the tables on Margaret and Patricia. What was yours? Share it below, and let's keep rooting for stories of strength and justice.